I'm David Werfel, professor of political science at the University of Missouri, and a specialist in Southeast Asian politics. I spent about 7 years in Asia, teaching, researching, studying. As a matter of fact, I've written particularly about the problem of corruption and fraud in elections.
Isn't it true, though, that the censorship now is going to be a little more rigorous as soon as the campaign starts?
No, sir, I don't think so.
But you have said, have you not, that the Vietnamese press should not criticize the candidates in the election. Why is that, sir?
Well, it's our formal and present policy. I don't think it's wise to allow people to use free press to, issue criticism each other, because it created more confusion, more division among the people.
The elections that were held in 1967 for national office, of course, in the first place, could be participated in only by people living in so-called secure areas, which excluded at least a third of the population that were in areas so thoroughly under the control of the NLF that the government couldn't even pretend to regulate affairs there.
That we should call to the attention of the people that the folks that are doing the most to keep us from having a fair and free election in Vietnam today are the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese themselves. Now, this is not to say that the campaign or the election in the South will go off without blemish. This is only to say that an effort is being made, and a strong effort, with our very strong support and endorsement, to conduct an open election in a nation that's under fire from guerrillas and from terrorists and from aggressors and from invaders.
And so President Johnson, being true to the origin of the elections in the first place, was very much concerned about how the American people would interpret these elections. And he saw that it was necessary to appoint an official observer team. But of course, most of the people had never been in Asia before. Almost none of them had ever been in Vietnam before. Very few of them even had any contacts in Vietnam. And so the theoretical opportunity to talk to anybody they wanted to simply could not be utilized. And in fact, most of those who talked to anyone except embassy people talked to those Vietnamese introduced to them by embassy people. Voting officials, voters, everybody were on their good behavior because the American observers were there. So for them to have expected that they would see fraud with their own eyes was simply absurd. Furthermore, they left Vietnam within 24 hours after the polls closed, and in that period after the polls closed, they did not speak to a single Vietnamese. The possession of a clipped and stamped voting card, of course, was a very important protection for the Vietnamese peasant. It was almost as important as having his registration card. And anyone in Vietnam who does not have an official government registration or identity card is in deep trouble. He's immediately assumed to be a Viet Cong, is taken into the police station for questioning, or worse. I saw even in Saigon, in working class districts, where on election day, rather early in the afternoon, the polling place ran out of ballots, and there were people already lined up wanting to vote at this polling place. When it was announced that they'd run out of ballots, the poor washerwomen and workmen were frightened to death. Oh, we've got to vote, we've got to vote, we've got to have our clipped voting card. So in balance, we had a government elected with little more than a third of the vote, hailed by the United States, Johnson administration, as being a popular and legitimate government. Nearly two-thirds of the people voting against it, and even that 35%, of course, being to a considerable extent a result of fraud and intimidation.
Ai hát ngoài kia như mật vào tai, ai hát ngoài kia nghe ngọt ngào thấy.
Ai đứng trong ai nhân ai một vài lời, lời này thì ví đêm dài, tình này là khúc xuân vầy.
Anh với lòng em như một dòng sông, Nam Bắc cùng chung chung tình đại dương. Tay bắt tay nhau thương nhau mặn nồng mà, tưởng rằng cuộc sống muôn đẹp, lòng tưởng một phút cuối cùng.
It was bad enough for the generals to get away with double voting and ballot box stuffing, but to have the American observers say that they thought it was all fine and dandy made Vietnamese very mad indeed. There were efforts to protest election fraud, there were student demonstrations, and as a matter of fact, at one point it almost looked as if the election would be invalidated.
What I think we've come to, and what I think the tragedy of Vietnam clearly demonstrates, is that we now find ourselves in a world in which the arrangements of power cannot yet be ignored, but in which the instruments of power no longer work. If this lesson has been taught us in Vietnam, then the stubborn little guerrillas out there who sawed off the American giant at the knees and brought him down, almost like David versus Goliath, will have done a great service not only to their own cause, whatever one may think about it, but perhaps to the cause of world peace, and perhaps most particularly to the Colossus himself. Maybe we needed to be brought up short. Maybe what we've been doing in Vietnam all along is an exercise in what Senator Fulbright has called the arrogance of power.
We cannot retreat from any place, and I can tell you that we don't intend to retreat.
We were asked by the State Department to prepare a letter and send it to Ho Chi Minh through a channel which had been opened and was available to us. We were certain would deliver the letter directly to him. It was a very conciliatory letter written in the State Department in consultation, word by word, with Secretary Bundy, Secretary Katzenbach, and others, in which we spoke on behalf, this was the actual phraseology, on behalf of high officials of the State Department.